All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of The Big Ben Show. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can follow me on X at BDomenech. Follow the show at Big Ben Show Fox on Instagram and on X. We thank you so much for all the attention you've been paying us recently, and to my team for all the different clips they've been pulling. We've had things go for over 500,000 in terms of views, and that's a great thing to see. So please follow and pay attention, because we are going to do more, I hope, in the coming weeks. Today, as we see the situation around the world, particularly in the Middle East, where a third of the U.S. Navy is currently either already there or roaring toward something that could lead to a potential confrontation with Iran, the kind of war in the Middle East that the U.S. has been loath to engage in, and is one of the reasons why Donald Trump emerged in the first place in terms of his criticism of it. We see a situation that requires great leadership. It's been a chaotic year. It's been a year that has seen, everything that's gone on in terms of the war between Israel and Gaza, the war that continues in Ukraine, everything that's happened in Venezuela, the rising influence of China, perhaps breaks in the NATO coalition over the battle over Greenland. This is something that really requires a firm hand, but also someone who has a great knowledge and awareness of what's going on in the world right now and what really is the most important thing. They need to be able to answer the questions that they have. And thankfully, the Democratic Party has that, and they definitely have it in a serious way when it comes to what went down in Munich.
Would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is of course a very longstanding policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point. And we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation and for that question to even arise.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's trip to Munich was supposed to be a launch of her as a serious potential presidential candidate for 2028. It's already become apparent that she's far more interested in doing that, where many polls have her as currently third behind just Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris among Democratic voters as the likeliest to become the nominee. And rather than navigate the situation of having to, potentially beat Chuck Schumer or something like that in New York, she would much rather make that jump. There's really low risk for her. She will have the kind of money and the kind of reaction from the populace that will elevate her as a politician no matter what the outcome is. She even did the kind of briefing beforehand with a number of different folks, mostly people on the Bernie Sanders team, about foreign policy in anticipation of this trip to Munich. And one of the things that really came out was how little the media has questioned her as it relates to defense policy, foreign policy, and the like. Her lack of awareness really showed, particularly in contrast with what we heard from the Secretary of State.
Under President Trump, the United States of America will once again take on the task of renewal and restoration, driven by a vision of a future as proud, as sovereign, and as vital as our civilization's past. And while we are prepared, if necessary, to do this alone, it is our preference and it is our hope to do this together with you, our friends here in Europe.
The thing that we heard from Marco Rubio obviously was a message that was designed to thread the needle in a number of different ways. To defend Trump's policies that have ticked off so many Europeans, to definitely double down on the type of approach that he has to foreign policy when it comes to the Western Hemisphere, when it comes to protecting America's interests around the world. But it was also an argument to the Europeans that was essentially a form of an olive branch to all of these diplomats who take things so personally, that basically said, look, there's more that unifies us than that separates us. We can make the West greater. We can rebuild it in many ways. We can address the problems that we have, and we would prefer to do that together as opposed to apart. don't break up NATO. Essentially, it was the message that Rubio was saying. And it fell in terms of the kind of response that you can expect to the Europeans on a pretty welcome reaction. They gave him a standing ovation. There were respectful things said. But behind the scenes, we actually heard from a number of different people who said, including diplomats who were not willing to go on the record, that they seriously felt that Rubio was still defending something that was indefensible, and that following on J.D. Vance's performance last year, which was viewed as insulting and offensive to the Europeans for a number of different reasons. He obviously, if you recall, criticized their free speech approach and the like. That basically they see little difference. That Rubio's talk was nice, that they respected it, but that it doesn't really change things. And that's something that I think is an indication that this current leadership in Europe would actually rather have the trajectory that they are currently on, getting closer with China, getting further away from America, not having to deal with the headaches and demands of the Trump administration or whatever administration comes next. Obviously, that's not true of every leader in Europe. They have different relationships with the United States and with President Trump. But certainly for many of the major figures there, they have been the most openly critical of everything that he has done when it comes to his going it alone foreign policy. Whether they were critical of his strikes against Iran and its nuclear program, critical of his approach to Maduro. They wanted to have a bunch of meetings together before they led up to any kind of reaction to him. Critical of course, of everything that he has said about Greenland, even though I think that there's a very easy solution, as I've said before, to that scenario. And that puts them in a position where they are actually closer to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in terms of her positions, not just domestically as it relates to the experience here in America, but also when it comes to foreign policy, where she is echoing a lot of the different things that we've heard before from other Democratic politicians.
I think what we identify is that in a rules-based order, hypocrisy is vulnerability. And so I think what we are seeking is a return to a rules-based order that eliminates the hypocrisies around when too often in the West we look the other way for inconvenient populations to act out these paradoxes.
Rules-based order. Oh my gosh, that buzzword that just sets their legs trembling. The Europeans responded to her performance in that panel, by the way. Her interlocutor responded by calling her amazing. The very first question to her was how long it could take her, if she became president, to impose a wealth tax, to which she said it was an imperative regardless who was president. The Europeans gave her applause for that as well. The Europeans agree with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez about the size of the welfare state. They agree with her about the fact that the United States has been too belligerent overseas. They agree with her that we shouldn't have a foreign policy that looks out for America's interests as opposed to what they describe as the interests of the globe. They agree with her when it comes to, having a fickle attitude towards Taiwan and China. And they agree with her, of course, on issues like climate, where they have continued to applaud and support her amazing Green New Deal. That's something that I think we shouldn't underestimate. And it's also one of the reasons that we shouldn't underestimate her as a potential candidate in 2028, even with all the gaffes and stupidity that she's involving herself in when she goes into stages like this. By the way, I just want to point out these gaffes came not from difficult questioners, not from people who were going to challenge her in any way that was unexpected. It came from friendly questioners, people who were inviting her into a serious place and treating her like a serious person, regardless of all the evidence to the contrary. When you look at the way that the Europeans have approached candidates potentially like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for the American presidency, they are far more welcoming and forgiving of anything stupid that they say, and where they will pick out any kind of gaffe that they hear from a Republican and hone in on it. They're a lot like the American media that way. But there is a problem, I think, for the Democratic Party that looks at AOC and says, oh, okay, that's a nice story, but it's going to play out the same as Bernie. She's going to have a lot of small dollar donations. She's going to rise up in terms of her potential competition. She could be the second to last person standing, but we're going to end up with Gavin Newsom or maybe Kamala Harris again. Her popularity has gone back up. maybe they'll even get somebody who fits more in this sort of abundance agenda, framing, somebody younger that they like Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland. But there's a problem with that. It's that when AOC actually connects with voters, she's doing it because they like what she's saying and what they hear from her on a host of different issues, and they don't really care if she has an answer on the Taiwan question or not. They are young, dumb, and full of communism, and it's one of these things that I think we have to recognize about the base of the Democratic Party today. And in comparison, the people that will be put forward to take on this type of rising agenda that elevated Zohran Mamdani to the mayoralty in New York City, they are people who are quite dissatisfying both as leaders and as candidates, despite the fact that they have the support from the blue states that they come from. They have not really had the types of records, whether it's California with everybody fleeing, whether it's Maryland with enormous problems internally, that you could actually build a campaign on that is sustainable and that reaches across to the types of people you would need to get to vote for you in order to beat the energy that is going to be supporting Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And why is that? It's because of their own mistakes.
You want to be big, you got to be big in big things. This is the only high-speed rail system of its type anywhere in the United States of America. You could talk all you want. You guys are actually delivering, making things happen.
I think that there's something that we have to make sure that we do better, and that's actually meet people where they are and move with a sense of urgency. The Democrats have got to stop being the party of no and slow and start being the party of yes and now. That everything cannot be a 10-year study. Everything cannot be a 15-year analysis, right? If I'm telling you that I feel like the school that my child is attending is not preparing them for the world, I don't want to hear you tell me, well, let me just make sure that I put a commission together to analyze that.
Gavin Newsom and Wes Moore are two people who both try to embrace this idea that they're building big things, that they're doing big things. And no, they're not low and slow and grounded in bureaucracy the way that all those other Democrats are. Of course, what they leave out there is that this Newsom's high-speed rail project has been a 25-year project that has cost would cost ultimately by some estimates up to $15 billion, billions over its initial budget. If it ever launches, it will be in 2038, 12 years late. And the California Commission in charge of it has already admitted that the rail line, even if completed, would not actually earn money for the state. Everything associated with has been a disaster. As for Wes Moore, the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which infamously collapsed in March of 2024, he toured it a year later. There has been almost no construction or anything related to moving that project forward, and they think that it will not be open again. This is a major bridge, by the way, until 2030. That's not exactly the kind of message that is going to win over voters who want to see Democrats who get things done. The other thing is, both men have huge authenticity problems. Gavin Newsom has been all over the map. One day he's the Fox News watching guy who brings Charlie Kirk onto his podcast. The next day he's this lizard-like creature who's just firing off trollish tweets at Donald Trump or Ted Cruz. He's been all over the place, and he doesn't really know who he is. He just seems like someone who just wants power. Wes Moore, his entire story, which was initially the reason that he was elevated so much, someone who had this biography that appealed to a lot of different people, has been coming under fire and under questioning thanks to the investigations of the Free Beacon, which have discovered so many different problems, both with his educational history, his family history, and more. I doubt that this is the end of that. I think that there's more coming. In comparison to that, with AOC, what you see is what you get. She is authentic in this social media era's definition of the term, even if she is being authentically foolish. And I think we should not underestimate the number of Americans currently on the left who are absolutely willing to accept that if they hear the types of unicorn promises that they have heard from candidates like her and from candidates like Zohran Mamdani. And as for the Europeans, a weaker America is something that they're totally fine with at this point. They're fed up with us actually asking them to live up to their commitments for the most part. And if that means accepting someone who is as silly as AOC when it comes to her analysis of global affairs, they're absolutely willing to do so.
You know, we look at what happened in Venezuela, for example. It is not it is not a remark on who Maduro was as a leader. He canceled elections. He was an anti-democratic leader. That doesn't mean that we can kidnap a head of state and engage in acts of war just because the nation is below the equator.
Bureaucrats, Macron, the leadership of the EU, and so many others, they actually don't care if AOC knows where Venezuela is or not. They just rather have someone more compliant and easier for them to push around when it comes to the U.S. presidency than Donald Trump. I'm Ben Domenech. You're listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. We'll be back with more right after this. There was more chaos in the late night landscape this week. I think Stephen Colbert might be a little envious of the fact that he's losing his show in short order, whereas Jimmy Kimmel's contest with the FCC that played out all across the networks and in the Hollywood press led to his show basically being completely defensible and something that they're going to have a tough time getting rid of, despite its cost and its lack of interest on the broad stage and utter partisanship when it comes to its display. Colbert got into the action this week with a situation regarding a Senate candidate in Texas. James Talarico is the favored candidate of the Democrat establishment. He is a young white guy who has been an active voice in the state legislature for Democrat causes. He has a religious background and is someone who speaks in the language that appeals to a lot of the same people. Think of him as kind of a straight Pete Buttigieg, who has that Ivy League credentials and connections with business that appeal to that demographic. There's a problem, of course, and that's that he's being challenged for this primary by one of the most fiery and populist and online popular Democrats in the state as well, one Jasmine Crockett. Talarico did an interview with Stephen Colbert that turned into a much bigger circus than perhaps initially expected. Here's what essentially happened, according to Colbert.
You know who is not one of my guests tonight? That's Texas State Representative James Talarico. He was supposed to be here, but we were told in no uncertain terms by our network's lawyers, who called us directly, that we could not have him on the broadcast. Then I was told in some uncertain terms that not only could I not have him on, I could not mention me not having him on. And because my network clearly doesn't want us to talk about this, let's talk about this. You've probably heard. So you might have heard of this thing called the equal time rule, okay? It's an old FCC rule that applies only to radio and broadcast television, not cable or streaming, that says if a show has a candidate on during an election, they have to have all that candidate's opponents on as well. It's the FCC's most time-honored rule right after no nipples at the Super Bowl.
You know, I think that at this point, CBS has to be regretting letting Stephen Colbert stay on the air after they let him know that they would not be renewing his contract or his show. There's a reason that in radio, they don't tell you till after you're off the air. Colbert is making a claim here about the equal time provision that he goes on to describe as being something that is kind of a throwback. It's something that has been ignored for a long time, since 2006, really. And even though it is technically something that is a limitation, hasn't been applied to these types of shows. That's actually false. In fact, we know it's false because it literally happened in the last election when you saw Kamala Harris get time on Saturday Night Live that then had to be shared with the Trump campaign in response to that because they're not, they don't have any kind of exemption on this when it comes to broadcast television the same way that you do when it comes to cable news. But ultimately what he did was get Talarico a lot more attention because they put the the interview online on YouTube. It got tons of views. And that's not something that is in any way going to help Jasmine Crockett as they head toward a primary battle. But here's what she had to say about that when she came forward to talk to the press.
We did receive information suggesting that the federal government did not shut down this segment, number one. That is my understanding, that the federal government didn't shut this down. And we will do an official statement once we get another official statement that we anticipate is going to be coming from Paramount. All right, so we will read what they say, and then we'll go from there. It is our understanding that Colbert, either Mr. Colbert or CBS, decided that they just didn't want Paramount. And this was because of a fear that the FCC may say something to them, and that there may have been advice to just have me on, and then they could clear the issue. It was my understanding that someone somewhere decided we just don't want to do that, and instead we're going to just do it this way.
So that's something that obviously changes the narrative that Stephen Colbert is advancing. Instead of his network kowtowing to terrible pressure from the Trump administration that just wants to shut down this rising young Beto-esque Democrat, it turns into a narrative that basically says you could have solved this by having on Jasmine Crockett, which obviously wouldn't have provided the same boost, particularly because unlike Talarico, at least from my perspective, she's a far more inspirational and telegenic figure. That's one of the reasons why she's had such success with viral moments in Congress and the like. That's one of the reasons that she's so elevated on the national stage in such a short amount of time. But Colbert was still trying to find some way to turn himself into the martyr in this situation and to rail against the Trump administration and his bosses at CBS along the way.
Anyway, I said my piece last night. We made some jokes. It's what they pay me for. And I was ready to let the whole thing go. Until a few hours ago, when my group chat blowed up because, without ever talking to me, the corporation put out this press release, this statement. Now, this is a surprisingly small piece of paper considering how many butts it's trying to cover. In it, they say The Late Show was not prohibited by CBS from broadcasting the interview with Representative James Talarico. The show was provided legal guidance that the broadcast could trigger the FCC equal time rule for two other candidates, including Representative Jasmine Crockett, and presented options for how the equal time for other candidates could be fulfilled. The Late Show decided to present the interview through its YouTube channel with on-air promotion on the broadcast rather than potentially providing the equal time options. Now, clearly, this statement was written by, and I'm guessing, 4 lawyers.
Colbert really wants a situation where he is this sympathetic warrior for the progressive cause, and it makes me wonder what he's going to do next. Maybe he's going to follow that Olbermann path. But it really is a falsehood when he's bringing this forward. He's claiming that the Trump administration and the FCC and all of this pressure was brought to bear on him, on his people, on his show, trying to elevate a candidate who is someone that the Democratic establishment wants to win. Colbert and the shows along these lines that are on late night, they haven't just become partisan vehicles. They've become partisan vehicles within partisan fights. They're now trying to adjudicate who wins and loses in a state primary for a Senate candidacy. How did we get to this point? How did we get from Ham Rove to this? I mean, talk about a downfall. I'm Ben Domenech. We'll be back with more of The Big Ben Show right after this. Happy to welcome back to The Big Ben Show, Bill Melugin. Thank you so much, Bill, for sitting here today and talking to me about a number of different topics. But I want to start with what the drama is right now around DHS. Mm-hmm. There's been obviously the shutdown that's happened on the Hill. But in addition to that, we've had very critical media stories that have come out about the leadership there, about Kristi Noem, about Corey Lewandowski. We saw Tricia McLaughlin, who's been on this show in the past several months, multiple times to talk about policy, depart from the agency. Tell me a little bit about what's going on at DHS right now? How stable are they internally, and how do you think this fight is going to end?
Not very stable right now. The tectonic plates at DHS have been shifting. There's been this drip, drip, drip of stories, and I think that's part of why you've seen Tom Homan come in, right? On that front, what was happening in Minnesota, things have calmed down. He's pulled them out of there. There haven't been any riots or protests the last couple of weeks, and for the most part, he's really cooled down some of those heated headlines that we've been seeing coming out of Minnesota. Now you ask about like DHS leadership. Every day now, there's a media story coming out about Kristi Noem, Corey Lewandowski. That's negative. That, Noem is using her influence to try to stop a Coast Guard search of a missing sailor in order to use the plane for deportation efforts, and that Corey Lewandowski tried to fire a Coast Guard pilot because Kristi Noem's blanket got left behind on the plane, right? So it's this drip, drip, drip every day. As for what's happening inside DHS right now, there's some reorganizing going on. Tricia McLaughlin is leaving. Her job is now essentially going to go to two different people. Lauren Biss, who is under Tricia, is now being moved up. And then Katie Zachariah, who's been one of our Fox News contributors, is going to take the more public-facing job. The spokesman, the spokeswoman, she'll be on TV. So you're kind of seeing a little bit of a shift here. About a year into the administration, they want some new branding, some new messaging. As for what's going to happen with Noem and Lewandowski, I don't know. President Trump has said he has no intention of moving on from Noem, but we'll see. He also doesn't like negative media stories every day.
One of the things that you run into in a midterm election year is always whether there's going to be a firing before or after people vote. Infamously, Donald Rumsfeld offered to resign before an election, and George W. Bush told him not to, and then ultimately he was fired after the election went so badly. And I think that this could be a similar situation with Noem, just in the possibility, in the frame of reference that Noem it departs either of her own volition or is removed. Who do you think the president might look to take over DHS, particularly given that everyone seems to tell me that that's not a job that Homan even wants?
Well, in the short term, I would say perhaps Homan. I know it's not a job he wants, but he loves Homan. Homan is adored by the base. He has bipartisan respect, even from Democrats. I mean, look at how Tim Walz and Mayor Fry even changed their rhetoric once Tom Homan came in, right? They said, well, he's at least a law enforcement professional. We can reason with him. And the MAGA base loves Tom. They have for a long time. So he's somebody you would look at, maybe for the short term at least. Maybe even Stephen Miller. I know he's already got the senior advisor role on immigration within the White House, but he's very good at communicating a message, and he loves to tangle with the media. DHS has to have somebody who can go toe-to-toe with the media, right? You got to have an aggressive person who can think on their feet. Another name, Chad Wolf. I mean, he's on our air very often. He was interim DHS secretary under Trump during his first term. He's cool, calm, collected, does the job without any fanfare, isn't going to be doing photo shoots out on ice raids or anything like that. So those are a few names, but Trump is very stubborn. He doesn't like giving the media what they want. And remember, for a while, it felt like Hegseth might get pushed out, right? He stood by him. He didn't want to give the media that scalp. He may do the same thing here with Kristi Noem. Wait for the dust to settle, maybe let Tom Homan kind of assert himself a little bit more, wait for things to calm down, and then maybe kind of just pivot.
The thing that I think is an unknown at this point about that is the demography of what this midterm is going to look like. And I think that if we see a situation where the Trump coalition that brought in so many Hispanic voters in particular, if that doesn't show up on election day, or if they show up for the Democrats, I think Republicans on Capitol Hill are going to be saying, you've got to change the way that you're doing this, because people have the impression that, their grandma's going to get picked up even if she's here legally, and that's that kind of thing. That you've lost the narrative on this and you need to reestablish yourself. Is that your analysis of the situation?
100%. And I think that's a big reason why Tom Homan removed Greg Bovino. Look, even some of Trump's most ardent mass deportation supporters will admit that maybe things got a little too far with some of these roving border patrols, where there were videos of them going around and seemingly confronting people, asking about their citizenship just because they heard Spanish or because they had brown skin, right? And that kind of rubs people the wrong way. I mean, a lot of Latinos voted for President Trump. You saw a lot of South Texas flip red in 2024. And that might have been a line too far. Everybody agrees with the targeted enforcement, going after the criminals, knowing who you're going after. But what we saw in Minnesota with these roving Border Patrol patrols was them just kind of going around and seeing who they could find. Even in LA, getting out of a Penske moving truck and chasing people down at Home Depot, anybody who ran from them. That'll get you more numbers, but at what cost, right? So I do think that was alienating some Hispanic voters. The question is, now that that's stopped, Tom Homan is in charge and he's directing everything to be targeted enforcement, you got about 9 months to kind of correct that image. 9 months is a lot of time. A lot of things can happen. And keep in mind, yes, it's been a really bad news cycle for Republicans in the Trump administration with Minnesota. You got 2 dead Americans. It's been rough for DHS. But Ben, you know as well as I do, that can flip on a dime. Yeah. What if there's another Laken Riley, right? Yeah. What if there's a young college girl who's raped and killed by an illegal immigrant, caught and released? All of a sudden, you're going to have support for ICE. It's always the public narrative pendulum, right? Yeah. And right now, it's been against Republicans. Before the midterms, can it swing back to kind of what it was before the 2024 election?
One thing that is an element that could happen here is seeing states that go soft on these issues experience those types of negative ramifications. In Virginia, for instance, we saw Spanberger basically push forward with the same type of national Democratic message of not cooperating, not working with anybody. What's your take on the immediate ramifications of that in the next couple of months? What are we going to see happen in terms of a shift when a state goes from cooperating, as it did under Glenn Youngkin, to basically shutting off the conversation entirely?
Well, you're going to have to keep an eye on these purple states, North Carolina, Virginia, places like that, because sanctuary policies, it's great for the progressive base, right? They love to be able to say we're protecting our immigrants, yada, 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 but they're also protecting some really bad apples. People who go into local jails and maybe they're arrested for an attempted rape of a child or something, and it's in a blue state with bail reform and they get let out on a $500 bond. And if you don't honor that ICE detainer and you let him out onto the streets and then another kid gets sexually assaulted, that's a bad look. And that's the kind of thing that's going to get put in a campaign ad for Republicans. And they're very effective with that. So think about how many times we saw ads about Laken Riley and Jocelyn Nungaray. Think about how many times that, like the ad on the trans issue. Kamala Harris is for they, them. President Trump is for you. They can be very effective with that messaging. So the sanctuary cities battle, that's going to be going on for a long time because Congress, I don't think, is going to do anything about it. And it's just going to be Democrats saying we got to protect our people and Republicans saying you people are lunatics and you're getting Americans killed. And then you're fighting over that 10% of independents in the middle.
What's the situation regarding this Georgia crash that has been in the news?
Horrible.
It seems like a terrible situation.
Here we go again. It's a special education teacher, innocent American, who was killed. ICE was chasing a Guatemalan illegal immigrant with a final deportation order. He got his due process and a judge ordered him to be removed from the country. They were chasing him. He fled. Police pursuit. He crashed into a car with that innocent teacher and killed her. But now there are Democrats blaming ICE, saying they should have never been pursuing him, when all they're doing is trying to enforce the order from a DOJ immigration judge. Are they supposed to just ignore the orders and let the guy go?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the attitude among Democrats is yes. It is. I mean, the thing that I think is so difficult here for ICE is we know in the media world that when a cop does something that is wrong or that they make a judgment call that turns out to be a mistake, when you have body cam footage that looks bad, it takes over the airwaves for a certain amount of time. And then you have a kind of additional things that come out afterward that mitigate usually some of what happened. But for the people who basically only see the first footage, that is what they get. The narrative that they get is this terrible thing that happened just because they were chasing this guy. Surely they could have done something else. And from my perspective, it takes the difficulty for ICE is they have this happening on a drumbeat basis where you've got so many people paying attention to them. You have so many designated people who are observing or what have you, filming them constantly, begging them to engage in the type of violent behavior against innocent people that they know will make them look even worse. that seems like a very difficult situation to navigate. And I'm not sure that this administration is really prepared to deal with it. And they certainly can't deal with it just by holding up pictures of bad people.
It's that saying, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth can put its pants on, right? And even with this case we were just talking about with the deadly crash, it was all over my X timeline yesterday. ICE killed this teacher. ICE murdered this woman. And I'm thinking, what? And then you actually read the DHS statement, which of course nobody posted.
Yeah.
They're chasing an illegal immigrant with a deportation order who crashed into the woman. Yeah. But you read all the algorithms just pump it up as ICE killed this woman. It makes it sound like they crashed into her. So it's that war of information every day. And if you're ICE, if you're DHS, I don't know how you keep up with it. I mean, think about how many media outlets out there. If one child is detained with a parent, the child is kidnapped and disappeared. If one person is injured during an ICE arrest, ICE is brutalizing. It's the Gestapo. I mean, they have to respond to so many things every single day. And to your point, a large majority of the people only see that initial headline. They see that 20-second clip on TikTok of someone getting hit or shoved down, but not the 30 seconds before it where they're getting up in their face and grabbing an officer's weapon or something like that. So I don't know how you fight back against that.
Talk to me for a moment about what you've experienced shifting from covering the border for as long as you have, covering crime and issues related to immigration, to covering Congress, which has got to be a major kind of world shift for you.
It is.
So what have you learned in your first period of time here in Washington covering Capitol Hill?
It's just a different style of reporting for me. Like when I was at the border, it was so visual. I could wake up every morning, just roll up with the camera and tell the story because everything was happening in front of me. Here on the Hill, it's all about the people, not the video. You got to talk to people. You got to pick their brains. You got to find out what's going on. Like right now, it's all about the DHS negotiations with the shutdown. What are the Democrats offering? What are Republicans offering? What's the White House offering? And is there any middle ground here? And right now, it feels like there isn't.
No.
What the biggest sticking point is the masks right now. The masks and the judicial warrants. Democrats are demanding that masks be taken off, and Republicans are saying, you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
Threats are up 8,000% against our agents. We're being doxxed. We're not taking them off. And Democrats feel they got to appease the progressive base and stand firm and fight for it. Republicans are saying, we're in the majority here. We're going to protect our law enforcement, and we're not going to make their job even more risky by showing their faces to the world.
Yeah.
But I mean, think about that. They're getting protested every day by these Antifa folks who are all there in masks, and then you want them to take their masks off. Another thing I'm hearing from Republicans that they're joking about a lot is one of the Democrat demands is they want ICE to display ID and show ID, while at the same time saying voter showing ID would be Jim Crow 2.0. You know,
that's a good. No, you're allowed to hold lots of ideas in your head at the same time. I guess, Phil. The other thing I'm curious about in terms of what you've learned looking at Capitol Hill is how out of touch do you feel the people in Congress are generally to the rest of the country that you've covered?
Some of them very out of touch. Others, I think, are pretty dialed. Like I think Tim Burchett is pretty dialed. I mean, he's posting. I'm sure you see his videos on Twitter. He's posting stuff. His frustration with Congress. What's really going on in there? I think there are a lot of members of Congress, obviously, who are tuned out and just show up and do a few votes here and there and aren't really listening to the bloodline of what's going on in the public. But there are a handful of them who really do care and really are trying to do the right thing and try to do what the people who sent them there want them to do. But especially in this age of everything being online, there's this disconnect where like you'll see a politician just throw up a tweet and it's so wrong. It has nothing right, but it gets amplified to the moon. And then you see them on network television later that night, further amplifying it. And then that becomes a story in itself. And like what we were talking about earlier, there's no, like the truth actually never has a chance to come out, you know?
The people who are on the Republican side of the aisle up there, what is their mood about the upcoming midterm election? How cynical and sort of down are they at this moment?
As of last month, they were very down. They'd been saying they thought they were going to get wiped out, especially because of everything that happened in Minnesota. They're starting to feel a little more hopeful now that things there have calmed down. That has largely gone out of the news cycle. And they're hoping there can kind of be like a spring reset where with Tom Homan in charge, you're still making ICE arrests, you're still going after bad people. But with it being more targeted, there shouldn't be any more of those super negative, high-profile incidents. So they still think they're going to lose the House at least. They're hopeful that they can maybe turn that momentum around. But a lot is going to play off of the economy this year, the impacts of the One Big Beautiful Bill, what's going to happen with Iran, right? I mean, we're moving a lot of military hardware over there.
Yeah.
Something could happen soon. And, you know, Trump's MAGA base is kind of split on that, right? Some of them believe in carrying a big stick and doing what you need to do, while others don't want any foreign involvement whatsoever. So that'll be interesting. There's so much can happen. Think about 9 months ago. That would have been what? I'm so bad at math. What, last April or something?
You know, I just had a kid, so you can't ask me to.
So I mean, just think about everything that's happened in that time frame. A lot can happen before November, and what we're talking about now likely isn't even going to be close to what we're talking about in November.
So you mentioned the Iran situation. What do you think Congress's reaction would be if the president pulls the trigger? And I mean, we've seen, look, a third of the U.S. Navy is currently, as we're recording this, either in or headed toward the Middle East. We have enormous signs that that this is a situation where the regime is basically just dug in and is not going to do anything. And what else is interesting is that we are not actually seeing army movement. So it's the kind of thing that where you might see just a lot of bombings. You know, kind of the imagine Gulf War if it didn't have any ground troops, basically. What will the reaction at the congressional level be if the president does that? Given that support for a regime change in Iran is actually something that, you know, predates the Trump era. It's been long, you know, sort of held by a lot of Republicans and some Democrats.
I think it'll fall, as usual, largely along party lines. You'll have Democrats outraged saying he needed congressional approval. They'll call for hearings. They'll want to call the generals in, like what we've seen with the Venezuelan boat strikes. You'll have a big percentage of Republicans supporting it, saying, you know, this is American strength. Although Rand Paul, I'm sure, will have a problem with it. But I think President Trump's in his second term. He's got a few years left. He feels like he's got wind in his sails after Operation Midnight Hammer last summer, success. The Venezuelan operation, remarkable success. Not losing a single soldier in that operation. I think he feels that he's the president to make something happen here, right? And he's kind of already shown that. Look, we did it with Soleimani. Look what he did with the operation last summer, and look what he did with Venezuela. I think if Iran does not agree to his terms in like the next several days, like to your point, all that military hardware over there costs a whole lot of money. And it's not just going to be sitting there for no reason. Yes, it's a deterrent to get them to the table and say, hey, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, here's what's waiting for you. But at some point, you can only circle the drain so long. If they're not going to make a deal, we know what's going to happen. You know, Jared Kushner's over there right now, and I don't recall him ever, you know, being a big fan of Rand Paul's position in this regard anyway. So, so I want to talk to you for a moment about the media. We saw AOC's performance in Munich this weekend, along with Secretary Rubio's. And one of the things that it really put in front of me is a reminder, and I don't know why I need to be reminded of this, is how different the questions are that you get depending on which side of the aisle that you're on. I realized I had never actually seen AOC asked a serious question about defense policy or foreign policy or anything like that, at least not that I can recall. It's certainly, you know, in a situation like she faced there, she was being asked it by someone who wasn't being aggressive or putting something, you know, negative in front of her, wasn't trying to trap her, but she was a deer in headlights. Does that irk you on a certain level that this is a situation where that's just accepted? It's just assumed that if you're on one side of the aisle, you are not going to get any tough questions, and if you are on the other side of the aisle, people are going to be constantly trying to trip you up because that's something that has to be in front of you on a constant basis. Well, that's the problem with echo chambers, right? AOC is used to being surrounded by progressives who agree with what you say, or she's used to going on MS Now and being asked, well, tell us why we should tax the rich or how horrible the zealot Republicans are. But when she gets asked a simple question, not even aggressive, just if Taiwan gets invaded, should the U.S. come to their defense? And she short circuits. I mean, what was that answer? she had no idea. She was trying to buy time to figure something out, but it didn't stop there. She also didn't have a basic knowledge of geography. She's trying to slam the Venezuelan operation that we're kidnapping the dictator Maduro because he's, quote, below the equator. Look at a map, AOC. Venezuela is entirely above the equator. And the shocking thing is, political reports, she spent months preparing for Munich.
That was the thing that was what fascinated me.
This was her red carpet rollout to introduce her for 2028, right? That's the idea. And she flopped, and she flopped bad.
But how much does that really matter to the Democratic base? Now, you have lived in Gavin Newsom's world for quite some time.
It's going to give the other one she'd go up against some fodder, right?
Yeah.
And it's also going to show where the weak points in her armor are. Now, if I'm Gavin Newsom, I'm thinking, I think I can hit her on Taiwan. I think I can hit her on anything with geography. Yeah. It at least gives you some mental notes of, AOC has been described as this amazing communicator and this next generation politician. But to your point, like the one time she's asked a substantive question, which isn't even that hard, all you have to say is, I'm not going to comment on that because I'm going to maintain strategic ambiguity, right? That's all you have to say. But instead, she just rambles for 20 seconds. Yeah. And if you're a Democrat voter, I mean, you may still love AOC, but is that going to inspire confidence? Mm-hmm. Is that your commander in chief for foreign policy?
Mm-hmm. I think that she's still going to have enormous appeal. But you are, I think, dealing with a problem there where they saw the stumbles that Kamala Harris had. They saw how ill-prepared she seemed for the job once she got out on the trail, and once we got past that whole kind of attempt by the media to turn her into this amazing new candidate. And I think with AOC, you may run into similar problems, and I think they'll be averse to it. Certainly donors will.
And think about if she runs, what the primary will be like, right? Primaries on both sides get nasty. Yeah. You get them on that debate stage together. They're not holding hands and singing Kumbaya anymore. Yeah. They're going to go after each other. And especially with people that have political ambitions like a Gavin Newsom, I could picture them clashing because it's the soul of the party, right? How the progressives versus the more centrist. Now, Gavin Newsom is still considered a progressive, but not as progressive as AOC, So it'll be interesting to watch. But I got texts from Republican congressmen sending me links to her clips with like clown emojis and laughing emojis. I mean, Republicans are just laughing at it.
I think that it's another situation, though, where we shouldn't underestimate how willing Democrat voters are to forgive that level of stupidity, which, I mean, can you imagine George W. Bush?
No,
as a pre-candidate, governor in Munich saying something like that, and the reaction that the media would have to it.
Well, I mean, it's like when Kamala Harris, remember her infamous Lester Holt interview? Yeah. But you haven't been to the border. Yeah. I haven't been to Europe. I mean, it's just every now and then you'll have these clips that go viral, and that can stick in people's head.
Okay, one last question, and thank you, Bill, for joining us today. We have seen this controversy play out at CBS about James Talarico, the candidate in Texas that establishment Democrats would like to see win the nomination, ideally hoping that Ken Paxton, the Trumpian Republican, will knock off John Cornyn and be the nominee on the Republican side, in which case they feel like they have a shot to actually win a Texas Senate seat, which has long been their dream. Jasmine Crockett has come forward and said that the whole situation with that Colbert interview, that she was basically learned that it was a situation where they didn't want to have her on. Yeah. And Colbert has reacted to it with consternation and, I don't even know if you can call it making fun because he doesn't do anything funny anymore, but basically railing at his own network. What is your impression of the degree to which these late night shows have essentially become hosts for the establishment Democratic Party's agenda? Because he's had Crockett on before, but the reason to not have her on now is because you want to specifically help this one candidate who the Democrat establishment and all the folks there think will give you a better shot in a general.
Republicans want to run against Crockett. Democrats want to run against Paxton. So what you saw with this is Talarico going out there and spinning this as some big corporate conspiracy to silence him and hold him down, right? When in reality, we find out that all CBS did was warn his show that, hey, if you have him on, according to the equal time rules at FCC, you're probably going to have Crockett on. So how did they get around that? They just posted it online and didn't actually air it, but they still complain, saying that Talarico says CBS and the Trump administration didn't want to hear from me. And then you have Crockett, who not a lot of Republicans agree with a lot, but she's right here saying that this worked because everybody's talking about it now. And to your point, some people see the initial headline, Trump administration blocks Talarico from being on CBS, and they think, ooh, I might have to listen to this guy. And so that Democrat primary is going to get pretty nasty. And the Republican one already is nasty.
It's going to be interesting how much this plays into it. And I think you're right that this was, it's almost kind of like, how can we find a way for him to pick a fight with the Trump administration? Let's do this. So a real gift to his efforts. Bill, thank you so much, as always, for joining the Big Ben Show. You can follow Bill Melugin on X at @BillMelugin_. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you.
And we're back with today's grab bag. Today, I wanted to talk to you about the situation that we see playing out when it comes to prediction markets a little bit more. There's been a major statement that has been made coming out of the CFTC that really shows how much this administration is becoming the Republican administration to embrace gambling and prediction markets generally in a way that we've never seen the party do so before.
Prediction markets aren't new. The CFTC has regulated these markets for over 2 decades. They provide useful functions for society by allowing everyday Americans to hedge commercial risks like increases in temperature and energy price spikes. They also serve as an important check on our news media and our information streams. Today, the CFTC is taking an important step to ensure that these markets have a place here in America and have the integrity and resilience and vibrancy that our derivatives markets deserve. To those who seek to challenge our authority in this space, let me be clear. We will see you in court.
The interesting aspect of this, of course, is that it's a pretty anti-Republican, traditionally, position to be opposed to states having the power to regulate things like this and to basically assert that that has to be done at the federal level, where the CFTC, of course, is very friendly to all of these different markets. It is interesting, though, to hear how important these things are. When the current top rated thing on Kalshi, as I'm talking to you, is what will Kathy Hochul say during her next announcement? Tax is at 19% and economic is at 27%. So you can win money doing betting one of those words, which will definitely have an effect on energy futures and the like. I think that this is a serious problem for Republicans. If they're going to embrace these types of prediction markets and also go up against the states when it comes to their ability to regulate them in a way that they obviously regulated things like sports books and sports gambling historically and have that authority over the differences between citizens in one state and citizens in another state, people who decide that they want to have that and people who decide that they don't. I think that there's going to be some problems, and we're going to see that, I believe, continue until either Congress or the courts step in. But I don't want to leave you with something as grim as that possibility. This week we had a clip go viral that you may have seen of a certain confrontation with an ICE officer and a Karen. You probably have seen it, but if you haven't, here's what happened.
This isn't a good look for you.
You think I care about my look?
No, oh no, trust me.
When you guys
it is evident by how you look, you don't care. We get that, trust me. No, that's all I'm saying. I'm just saying this, trying to be a social warrior. If you actually cared, you probably would care about the child who got raped and also the person who got murdered by the person that we were looking for. But see, you don't care.
No, I don't care because you guys try.
Thank you.
Try to detain legal immigrants.
I have never had the pleasure of seeing one of my tweets get turned into a narrated AI before, but I have Dylan and the rest of the Guy Benson Show team to thank for what they produced next, something that I tweeted in response from imagining the voice of one David Attenborough.
As the dominant Karen roams the savannah of suburbia, patrolling her domain with unmatched ferocity, she is nonetheless bewildered and confounded by the abrupt emergence of her oldest foe, whose praise she craves and wrath she fears the most. The sassy gay.
We need a lot more of that David Attenborough in our lives, narrating situations like this. It's inspiring and makes me want to go watch Blue Planet again. Thank you for listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. Always a pleasure to hear your feedback on all the different things that we discussed today. Leave your comments below, and I hope that you'll share it and review it, like it, and let us know what you think. We'll be back with more next week to dive back into the fray.